Hi, I'm Asha Pandya, Research Analyst. Thanks for joining me today to discuss candidate interviewing. You know that interviewing candidates is important to your organization. You also know that being a great interviewer is tough work. There's no doubt that becoming an effective interviewer takes commitment and practice. But what can you do to improve right now? In this session, I will help you identify common interviewing errors, why they're ineffective, and what you can do to quickly improve your skills. Before you ask any questions of the candidate, you need to get into the interview zone. Remember, your goal is to assess the candidate for a position within your organization. So don't go into the interview without a specific idea of what you are looking for. This will cause you to ask unfocused questions, which will result in answers that cannot help your assessment. You may neglect to see the value in a good candidate, or worse, scare off a great candidate with your unprofessionalism. Before you go into an interview, take the time to review the job specifications, the candidate's resume, and the evaluation scorecard if your team has created one. With your goal in mind, maintain the interview zone when you meet the candidate. Don't be overly chatty or get off topic. This will waste both of your time. And you won't come out of the interview with a good picture of the candidate's abilities. Instead, let the candidate speak to your questions and ensure you listen closely and take notes. Stay in the zone and focus on what the candidate says throughout the interview to avoid the dreaded first impression bias. Don't submit to this, or you'll spend the rest of the interview justifying your initial feelings, which is really counterproductive to an effective interview assessment. Half the battle is being aware of the first impression bias. However, you also need to prepare the interview as an assessment tool and not a casual conversation. Follow prepared questions, assess the candidate using a scorecard, and closely listen to the candidate speak. Always include more than one interviewer in the process because there is really only so much we can do to fight human nature. To best prepare, plan your questions in advance. Asking the right questions during the interview is key to getting the information you need to assess a candidate. Don't ask only traditional questions. What is your greatest strength is a question practiced time and time over. And candidates know this. They've also practiced it time and time over. You're not going to get any insight into a person's actual experiences or competencies when they give you a generic answer like, "Teamwork is my greatest strength." So if you do use traditional questions, dig deeper. Probe or use behavioral questions. For example, tell me about a time where your team worked to deliver an exceptional project. Or, what were the key elements that enabled this outcome? Those are the kind of questions that will really assess whether a candidate knows anything about teamwork. For the same reason, don't ask mostly hypothetical questions that usually start with, "What would you do in a situation when?" There's no doubt that situational questions drive out a candidate's ability to analyze and react to specific circumstances. But hypothetical scenario questions also allow the best storytellers to excel. So make sure you ask those behavioral questions, questions that usually start with, "Tell me about a time when," to evaluate attributes that are essential experience requirements for the job role. Remember, interview questions need to have a purpose, so don't bother with gimmicky questions like, "What vegetable represents your soul?" These questions are usually for entertainment purposes and show little about a candidate's ability to perform on the job. They might also create completely irrelevant biases, especially if you like carrots and the candidate says peas. Unless you're testing for abstract creativity or quirkiness, use your interview time more wisely and plan your questions. If you need to break the ice, discuss general subjects. The weather may not be the most exciting topic, but it shows restraint and professionalism. The best prepared questions are moot unless you're ready to use that information constructively. So use your preparation effectively. Imagine this. You're conducting an interview and the candidate seems great. You begin to put your planned questions away. But wait, don't forget to ask those motivation and fit questions. You may have a competent candidate, but if he or she doesn't fit with the organization, you might be setting yourself up for a bad hire. For example, what if the candidate prefers to work alone, but your organization is highly collaborative? What if the candidate is looking for a salary far beyond your cap? It is essential to ask questions around management preferences, work style, salary expectations, and long-term career goals to determine if the hire can realistically be successful. It is in the best interest of both you and the candidate to discuss these issues before the end of the interview process. Using planned questions and a scorecard can help you be objective, but any assessment is going to be informed by bias. The similar to me effect can be especially detrimental when you fall in love with a candidate that is just like yourself. For one, those too similar to you may not have complementary qualities. Another issue is that you lose out on a variety of other qualified candidates and contribute to a culture of homogeneous talent. While your awareness of this natural human tendency is key, so is thoroughly understanding your ideal candidate attributes. What qualities are going to benefit you, your team, and your organization? Record your interview assessment in these terms during the interview. Finally, don't be unrealistic. Candidates will lie, and your gut feeling will be a factor in how you conduct the interview. Don't be stoic and unrelatable to mitigate this. Instead, create a positive atmosphere of information exchange by being courteous. If you have prepared in advance and your mind is in the interview zone, there's nothing wrong with offering the candidate a beverage, or a smile for that matter. When people feel comfortable and respected, they are more likely to respond openly. Furthermore, creating a good impression of your organization is essential to attracting top talent. Hiring the most effective candidates for your organization is critical for all parties involved. While interviewing well is no doubt challenging, the information in this session should give you some quick tips to increase your interviewing competency in the short term. However, you should plan to take training or professional development courses to develop your techniques further, and always evaluate your interviewing performance, just as you would a candidate.